All right, so first things first, good morning. Welcome to the next CTAS Education Clinic. Now, this clinic is going to be on what I consider somewhat of a fringe topic. It's one of those things where it's very important, often misunderstood, like many other things in exercise science that we usually talk about, but it's also quite overlooked. Right? A lot of individuals, when they're going to perform an exercise session, they may think of the muscles they want to train. And they may have a general idea of what they want to do, right? I want to run 5 miles. I want to run for 20 minutes. I want to sweat. I want to feel this when I'm done. I'm going to do some push-ups, some sit-ups, whatever they think for that session. But as we've been talking with program design and how specific your intent should be for your training session in order to get the most out of it, we really want to take that same mentality and start applying it to our cool downs as well as our warm-ups. So in this clinic, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be discussing the different types of warm-ups. Good morning, Matt Sharp. Good morning. Hopefully in ways that you may not have thought about before. Really trying to get into the different distinctions about it. But on that note, let's go and start with the idea of how do you normally approach a warm-up when you go and either train or work out?
Me? I just go.
You just go straight into
I
it?
just go straight into it, and I stretch afterwards if I feel like in kind of way after the PT set.
All right, so get into it and then just stretch after it if you feel so. Sorry, Rodriguez?
I start with like very lightweight. Like I usually do anything with shoulder related because I feel I'm gonna get exercise up. With like very lightweight, I'll do like
Okay.
5 repetitions.
All right.
For the muscles, I guess.
Low intensity,
Yeah.
high volume, warm up those muscles. Excellent.
So it just depends on what body part I'm actually working on in the process. So, I mean, up to probably 2 weeks ago, I wasn't actually doing my warm up to full capacity. I do it to get loose. And then
Okay.
I start. And I like a turn to get loose. And but I started the method that you said, like, hey, listen, you're working on chest, like your back part,
Okay.
for the workout, which I feel the difference.
Ma'am, what were you saying?
I can stretch.
Just stretch?
You're basic. So that we can get warm. I'm going right into it.
I got too much stuff to do.
Yeah.
That's fair. What about you, Sergeant Watts? What do you do for a normal warm up?
Synovial fluid's gotta.
It depends on the day. It depends on what I'm training. So, I've added the winning warm ups when I'm doing like whether any compound movement. I do the 3 accessory winning warm ups, 4 sets of 25. If I'm running, I make sure I do running drills. High knees, different technique work, and overall, I always have like a 5-minute endurance machine warm up before any exercise that I do or workout.
Excellent, excellent. So he's applying a lot of what we're going to be talking about today, which is good. He's been through the Master Fitness Trainer course, and he's applying and Sergeant Latney said too, some of the things we've gone over in this clinic, which we'd love to hear. Right, and one of the things he mentioned was running drills prior to running, which we discussed when we had the running technique and analysis class. Right, running is a skill, and there's so many dynamic movements in there that the better you prepare your body for those movements, the better you perform. And then therefore, the better you perform in the actual activity, the more you actually get out of it. So that's something I really want to stress and highlight because warm-ups really should be programmed and completed with specific intent just as much as your actual training session. And they are just as important as the actual training session because they can either hinder or help the session itself. And if your session doesn't go well, then your body's not really going to get much out of it, right? So you need to make sure that you're planning it appropriately. But what we're going to be talking about in this clinic, we're going to be talking about the purpose of warm-ups. The purpose of warm-ups are going to lead us into fascial pathways. Does anyone have an idea, just seeing those words, what that may mean? See some shaking of the heads.
It's a hard no.
A hard no, all right.
Hard no.
So we'll get into those pieces for that, and then we're going to break down the various types of warm-ups. Now, I will say when we get to the fascial pathways, it gets a little bit deeper into anatomy and kinesiology, but but the intent isn't for me to turn this particular clinic into a kinesiology class, like we've had a introduction to physiology last week, I believe it was. But the intent is to kind of open your eyes on how specific the body really is with regards to warm-ups and how these affect our emotions. Now, for warm-ups themselves, when we talk about the purpose of a warm-up, if we think of like Army doctrine, right? What is the traditional warm-up that we have within Army doctrine?
Preparation drill.
Preparation drill, right? Which consists of 10 exercises, and it's done in a dynamic motion, right? So you usually do them between 5 and 10 repetitions. They're 4-count movements, and the intent is to take each of your athletic joints through all 3 planes of motion, which we talked about in the program design class, right? The sagittal plane being straight forward and backward, the frontal plane being side to side lateral movements, and then the transverse plane, which is rotational movements. So the preparation drill is meant and designed specifically in order to start with taking your spine, your vertebral column, through full flexion. So in the bend and reach, you're supposed to really reach as far through your legs, including bringing your chin to your chest as much as possible in a slow manner, rather than just trying to touch the ground like some individuals will, because your spine is where all movement starts. Our musculoskeletal system is voluntary in nature, right? We move it by intent. And when you send that signal from your brain to even move your fingers, it has to go down your spinal cord, down various nerves, through your brachial nerve, in this case, your radial and your ulnar nerve, down to your phalanges to be able to move your fingers. But it has to hit that spinal column. And when you take that spine through that flexion in those slow manners, you're both aiding the spine and being able to send signals better for the rest of your movement, as well as aiding with the movement of spinal fluid, which is going to act. If you have, if you're any of you are mechanically inclined, individuals are mechanically inclined, you understand the idea of hydraulics and kind of how that fluid would help the system. And it's very similar in our body for that matter. All right, so warm-ups in general do 3 primary things. They increase your heart rate, right, which is going to allow oxygen to get into the muscles quicker, and allows your cardiovascular system to take away the acidic properties that are created through muscular contractions. Because as you go through constant muscular contractions, your muscles actually create hydrogen ions, which we consider acid, and your bloodstream pulls them back in out of the way. Your lungs exchange that for oxygen. It goes right back in your muscles, so you can keep doing the activity longer, right? So the expedited or the increased heart rate will help your performance in that manner. It also increases the responsiveness of your nerves, because you're already sending electrical and chemical signals to innervate certain nerve plexus, which is considered a muscle action potential, a MAP, right? So by sending those down, the body's already kind of innervated and warmed up those areas, right? So it's much easier to activate quickly and strongly when you need to have more force that has to be produced. And it makes the muscles more pliable because you increase your overall body temperature. As your body temperature increases through exercise and through these muscle contractions, the fascial tissue that sits within your actual skeletal muscle and that sits underneath your skin, all of that starts to become more malleable, more pliable, because it's this clear viscous fluid, and as it starts to move more, you can get more movement, you can get into more range of motion, which means you can produce force at different areas of range of motion to increase your overall performance. So all of these are ideal to be able to begin. Now, your overall types of warm-ups that those are broken down to are the 3 that you see on the screen. We have general warm-ups, which the entire purpose is just to increase the heart rate. This can be practically anything. This could be exactly. You could this be you jogging in place, old side straddle hop, right? This could be doing burpees. This could be box jumps. This could be anything that you want, where the intent is not to fatigue your musculoskeletal system, but to increase your heart rate to, if you wanted to be very specific, approximately 2.1 to 2.9 for you. And we went over how to calculate your training heart rate within the cardiovascular training class, right? For, an easier sense of it is 220 minus your age. And then you're going to take away your resting heart rate, and then you multiply it by a percentage, or the 2.1 to 2.9 is going to be anywhere between like your 60 and 70% of your total heart rate. That's where that comes down. Your dynamic warm-up is where you want to focus on either mobilizing and or stabilizing different joints. And it really is important for each of us, for ourselves, for our own health, and for the soldiers that we're helping, to really understand the difference of when does something need to be mobilized and when does something need to be stabilized. You have some issues like shin splints, as an example, right? Mediotibial stress syndrome, which is a overuse injury in the lower third of the tibia, the medial part of the tibia, that happens due to instability in the ankle and the subtalar joint. Right, your ankle does plantar flexion and dorsiflexion, so your foot going up and down, and your subtalar joint does inversion and eversion for your foot actually facing in and facing out. The instability of an individual's foot to be able to land the same way on every step causes a shearing force throughout that nerve system on that tibia. And if done too much, which is why it's an overuse injury, causes shin splints. So one of the best things to do to prevent shin splints, to both prehab against it and to rehab from it, is to help stabilize that ankle joint. And this could be done through anything that would make that ankle and subtalar joint unstable, right? Creating some type of isometric position, such as a single leg deadlift, some type of, any type of single leg motion, whether that's on a floor, an Eric's pad, like a foam pad, a Bosu ball, something that'll make you have to focus on the stability of your leg so you get better at it, will therefore create stability later on so you no longer have to worry about the stabilization problem. Or you have individuals that they've had some type of injury, maybe they've had a surgery as well, shoulder, hip, knee, etc. They feel like they lack the range of motion to get into a certain position. In that case, we need to do what? We need to mobilize the joint, right? If you did a quick assessment of yourself or an athlete, you just had them put the feet together and then you had them try to reach down toward their toes. And this is as far as they got, right? You could see that there may be a restriction either in the hamstring. You got to see restriction maybe in the lumbar area of their back. Maybe it could be on the plantar side of the foot. So you see some people would take a foam roller, tennis ball, golf ball on the plantar side of the foot because that's all connected to a certain fascial pathway, which is what we're getting into. And by basically innervating the nerves in that area, you introduce more range of motion. Now, if they're able to get 2, 3, 4 inches more, then when they're actually doing the movement, that means the force that produced at different ranges of motion is going to carry over longer. And that's where you get your reduction of injury and your increase of performance. Right? Because injuries typically come from our body overreacting to force being produced in an angle that we're really not used to. And our body does that safety mechanism with our proprioceptors we talked about in the physiology class. So your muscle spindle, your GTO, it governs you, right? You can't produce force here, so it stops the contraction automatically. And by it stopping contraction, we perceive an injury occurring, right? And then we have some type of discomfort or pain that's related to it. So
in actuality, they're not just segmentary lifestyle.
well, they're absolutely right, ma'am. So because the body does what? If you're sedentary all the time, it adapts to being better at being sedentary. Absolutely. And that includes ranges of motion, which is where the fascial pathways are so important and understanding planes of motion is so important. If you don't normally take, say, your humerus through full internal external rotation, so this is your extent of your, of how well you can perform those motions, internal or external, rather than being able to go all the way, then when you need to go all the way and your body doesn't know how to, that's where your injury may occur. Because your body hasn't adapted to the capability of doing that. You're absolutely right. And that's why being sedentary is such a huge modifier that increases injury risk. And people that lack physical activity increases your injury risk, and doing exercise will reduce it. It's a good point, man. Good. And then we have the specific warm-up. The specific warm-up potentiates the movement, or for another phrase, it primes the movement. This is simply doing whatever the main activity of your exercise session is at a lighter intensity, right? As Sergeant Rodriguez brought up, so did Sergeant Watts, right? So the intent is if you're going to go run, and you jog before you run, right? It's a pace that is practicing the exact same form, hopefully, but it's not an intensity that should fatigue you. It's allowing all the things we talked about before to take place to increase your capability of running. Are there any initial questions on the 3 types of warm-ups that we have?
Do we do all of these in the morning before we get up off the bed?
So that's a really good question. In a way, yes, but it's very limited, right? So if you consider the normal individual getting out of bed, maybe even they turn their back a little bit, they do a small little dynamic stretch, just in order to be able to move. Now, you've been in a horizontal position, maybe a fetal position for an extended period of time. So now gravity is going to affect you differently because you are standing, right? And your spine is in a vertical position instead of horizontal, which means your spinal fluid is going to move a little bit differently. And now you're actually starting to go through your walking gait. You may be sitting and standing. You may be reaching for things with your anterior delt, right, with your shoulder. So in those cases, the small things that we do in the day will get warmed up. But those are usually not the areas that were at high risk of injury either, right? It's usually, have you gone through any type of hinge movement? Have you been able to reach behind you, overhead at all? And if it was just once, you may not preparing your body for other things. You're just going through what you can already do, right? So your body's not necessarily adapting. But that's a really good point, right? As far as what someone can do.
I'm gonna mention, speaking of that, I mainly don't like working out in the morning because I feel it takes me a lot of time to like wake up and like properly warm up and everything.
Yes.
I like to eat. So like, I feel like if I work out, like, let's say 4 or 5 p.m.,
Mhm.
I've already eaten. I've already been walking out and about. I've already been doing stuff all day. I'm already all warmed up, and I feel, for me, that's why I don't like working out in the mornings, because I feel throughout the day, I'm all loosened up.
I saw some contradictory looks on your face on that, John Ladney.
I mean, that, in a sense, yes, but if you look at our occupation during the whole day that we're being mobilized, actually, you don't have that. I mean, not saying nothing, but I feel like because you have just rested, if you get a good rest, when you wake up, you have the most energy in the morning time. Plus,
Right,
depending on
energy-wise, yes. Energy-wise, yes. I will have more energy in the morning. Energy-wise, yes, but warm-up-wise, I feel, at least for me, like, I enjoy it. I like it more that way because, like I said, I eat and I'm hydrated in the morning. Like, I feel like
Right.
extra dehydrated, so.
So there's several really good points within that, right? So one, we have seen through various studies that individuals are able to be more in tune with their training session if it's done usually in the early afternoon is typically seen as the best time, but early afternoon or evening. But that doesn't mean that everyone needs to train then either, right? So if some individuals feel that a morning training schedule will work better than a schedule, some feel an evening training schedule will work better than a schedule, whatever they can stick to the most is going to be what's going to be most beneficial, right? Because if you can't stick to it, it's already pointless. But it was also brought up not only your energy availability, but your acuity from first thing in the morning may be really good to be able to train. But there's small factors that affect this. So he mentioned that he may not feel like he has energy. He mentioned that he has food in the evening before his training sessions, or at least sometime before his training sessions, because he's been feeling throughout the day. He feels dehydrated in the morning, which is also true, right? Many other things. So the premise with that, it would be maybe if he's attempted morning training sessions, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, maybe you tried them after waking up rather than waking up, eating, hydrating, waiting 30 or 45 minutes before you train, correct? Right, because typically in the morning, people plan, if that don't train in the morning, they plan with enough time to get to work. Right, so there may not seem like there's enough time to be able to do a lot of that.
Right.
But as we talked about in the nutrition class, being able to hydrate prior to your session, and if you're able to fuel, which definitely benefit your session, especially with carbohydrates, right? 1 gram per pound of body weight an hour before your training session would set you up for the most success, rather than trying to train fasted and things like that, which you've seen that you don't enjoy.
Right, and I also like I run better. Like every time I run in the morning fasted, I don't run the same as when I run, let's say in the afternoon or whatever.
That's going to be absolutely the case for a lot of people. For some people, even if they could run better in the afternoon or evening, if they feel they can stick to it better in the morning and their day starts better from all the reward hormones that you get from training, right, then that would be beneficial to them. So the reason I'm pointing out these differences is because it's not that one is right and one is wrong, right? That's not the case in any of these, but there's benefits, there's pros and cons.
Pros and cons to each of them.
Absolutely. And here's the other thing he mentioned. It takes him too long to warm up in the morning. How long do you think a warm-up session should last? So Whitney said I warm up as I do my activity.
Honestly, like 5 to 10 minutes. I say 5 to 10 minutes.
All right, so putting on the shoes, 5 to 10 minutes, what else you got?
I think
This is the word right here. This is it.
Put on my shoes, I better say that wrong.
I don't know, I'll probably say like 20 to 30 minutes.
Okay.
Depending on how long your workout is gonna actually be.
There's the key, right there. There's the key. So if you were going through and doing a very specific design to your program, you should be able to take the total time of your workout session. And this is true for everything except for very long distance runs. This is the very long distance runs are the only caveat to this statement. But you should be able to take the work period, the total work period of your training session. That should equal your warm up and your cool down time combined. So if your workout session was gonna be approximately half an hour, then your warm up and your cool down combined should last approximately half an hour. Not that it has to be divided evenly. That means your warm up could be, 25 minutes and your cool down could be 5 minutes. But to set your body up for the most success, right? Injury reduction and adaptation, you want your warm up and cool down to equal your overall workout session. That's the idea of the program. Any questions?
Hey, Sean Rice, I got a question.
Go ahead, Sir Watts.
So I think, yeah, it was just mentioned about, I don't know who it was, but they were saying about how they work out better in the afternoon, right? That's what he
Yes.
was pretty much saying. So like, I know we always speak about game day. So like, how does that correlate when it's time to, take tests? Like, how do you, I'm just curious, based on his statement, like, how does that correlate when it's time for him to take say for instance, an ACFT in the morning time? How does that work out for him?
So you're curious about his own?
Roger,
how he
yeah, 'cause
feels
I
or
was
what the
just-
science would say about it?
What was that, Sean Rice?
Are you curious about how he would feel taking an ACFT in the morning versus afternoon, or what the science would say about it?
Both, actually.
Okay, well, let's start with this idea. Go ahead, Sean Rodriguez.
Oh, what he's saying, like,
So he's,
I can't hear him properly, that's why.
no, it's fine. Let me reiterate. So he is curious. He wants to know, based on your preference on feeling that you work out better in the afternoon versus the morning, how that carries over to you taking a physical assessment in the morning versus the afternoon.
Tough luck for me.
Tough luck if you have to do
Yeah,
what?
tough luck for me.
If you have to take it in the morning?
Yeah, it's an inconvenience, but it is what
If
it
you
is.
had a choice,
I mean, if I had a choice, I would take it in the afternoon, but
okay.
Interesting.
it's never an option in the army.
Well, it can be.
It can be, but I've
Takes
never
forever.
taken a PT test anytime other than 0:30 in the
Yeah.
morning.
Which is another interesting point.
So it's like, you barely sleep that night,
Right.
because whenever we have PT
But
tests,
the army doesn't, yeah.
you have that shit in your mind all day. So like, you barely sleep, and then like, okay, I want you here at 5 o'clock in the morning. And then, you go there, you're dehydrated, you haven't slept well. All of these factors are gonna contribute.
And then you don't warm up properly before.
And then you don't warm up, because they're like, don't do anything, save your energy
Ah,
for the
horrible.
for the test.
All of that's
You know,
horrible.
all of that, so it's like, it's whatever, really, like, it's tough luck for me, but if it's inconvenient for me, it is what it is, I'll do it. It's not gonna, it is what it is.
You done.
So I
Yeah,
just
it is what it is.
happen to take various physical training or physical assessment during the day. Like literally, like, oh, dang, we're gonna take it at lunchtime. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? So what I'm saying is it depends on, I think, the person itself. Do I feel like it varies? No, because it depends on their preparation to the actual CFT. So like I said, if I got one coming up in 2 weeks, literally, my whole diet completely changed because I prepared directly for the ACMT.
Right.
After, I really don't care what happened. So it is one of those things, like I said, I have taken it in the afternoon. I felt like it was horrible. Only for the simple fact is that, yes, and the fact that like your body loosened, you woke up and fully awake. But my factor is the sun, the temperature, the heat, the humidity. I can't take it. Like in the morning time, I'd rather run in the cold than the hot. And people don't really get the difference, but I breathe a lot better. And
That's very true.
cold
It's really
than
good for you.
no, the only thing that hurts is my ears, but legit, I feel like it's that difference, the humidity, the heat, everything, you feel exhausted when that sun is beaming, especially in Puerto Rico. I have ran 5 o'clock in the morning, I done ran 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and I ran like 6 when the sun is going down. It's completely different every time I run. I mean, like I said, it's just the factors on how you.
We also have.
I mean, obviously, like, if you're gonna tell me to take a PT test at noon, I'll be like, fuck no, like, let's take it at 5 o'clock in the morning. I mean, I don't mean in the way, like, obviously, if you're gonna bring in the factor of the sun, then yes, absolutely, no, I don't want the sun. Like, don't, you can, that bargaining shit, is not, I'm not gonna fly with that.
Right. So the environmental factors do obviously play a big part. I know that Matt Sharden was trying to say something, and then Matt had a piece too.
Yeah, I think it's just I think you just have to be adaptable no matter what. You don't have a choice because we're in a.
Yes, it is what it is.
We're in a career where
Mhm.
we are going to move from one place to another.
Absolutely,
You can't stay
absolutely.
on the island forever.
Exactly.
And I can't stay in Montana forever. So at some point, we're gonna cross paths and somebody's gonna be sucking.
Yeah, that's why,
Now it's me.
when they ask me like, how do you feel? I'm like, it's just tough luck. It's inconvenient, but it is what it is. I can't, there's no shape around it.
Well, I have some points to add to that. Go ahead, ma'am.
I think that, the army is good at putting things on paper. But once it comes off the paper and it goes to the field to implement, I think the army lacks in a lot of areas just because a lot of the people making the decisions are not in the field. And with that, I say, are we taking the APFT, ACFT to pass it? Or are we taking the APFT and the ACFT to ensure the soldiers are living a lifestyle that capacitates them to move forward to whatever location, in whatever environment, hot or cold, and make them capable and maximize their potential in that area, whatever area it may be.
Absolutely.
So if we do it, am I going to school to just pass the test? However, maybe Lanny can give me all the answers. Maybe I could study and get the answers. Am I going to school for that, just to check the box? Or am I going to school to learn and be able to teach and be able to master something?
Wonderful
right?
points, man.
So I think that the Army lacks in that area of execution.
Yes.
I also think that it's tradition. So the thing about it is they created something as a tradition to do it in the morning time.
That's also true.
So I think that because nobody likes to break a tradition, coming up with the idea to do it at another time is completely insane. Right. I appreciate the AGR program because sometime during the day, they say here and say, hey, you got that hour to, which is not enough time, but.
Yeah.
But you do some physical training, but it never tells you what time to do
Right.
so. So that's why I say, it's like even me prior to being active duty, the morning time, like when I first do, like, yo, this is crazy. Why am I coming up 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning? I'm not even awake right now. My body is on autopilot. But
You
at the
told me
same,
that I got off work at midnight, man.
Right.
Exactly.
but at the same time, like it's the tradition. They just don't break. So that's
Yes.
when they implement new things, like as far as what we do now. I feel like it's basically person, unit, or leadership to sit here and say, well, listen, we survey. Hey, would y'all rather do this at 7 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning? I'd rather do this right before
I think it should be implemented into the lifestyle of PR and what we, just like the Marine Corps. They take off their tops and they say, you know what, we're gonna go rucking for lunch.
Right.
And they get together and they go rucking for lunch. You
So,
know what I'm saying?
A lot of these are very valid points. So let me bring up the science part to answer Sergeant Watt's question, and then kind of bring into the logistics of how we can approach these, because you were making very valid points, right? On what we see as leaders, what we've observed, what we also need to do, just like the master brought up for our overall occupation. And because we won't, especially as AGR, we won't stay in one location for a long time. So as far as what the science says on your capabilities with both performance in an assessment and within normal training sessions, and those do need to be separated. In a normal training session, you will generally perform better first thing in the afternoon. If you look at a regular circadian rhythm of an individual sleeping through the night, so we're not talking about swing shift, we're not talking about individuals that work at night. So a normal circadian rhythm where they sleep at night, they wake up, roughly around sunrise, if not before. They've been awake for approximately 6 to 8 hours with fuel in their system, usually will perform better in a normal training session. That is not necessarily true for assessments. And the reason it's not necessarily true for assessments is another part that Sergeant Rodriguez brought up, whether he understood how it affects the body or not. And that comes to it comes into a sports psychology piece, but this is where stress can turn into anxiety. Right. So even if you're not worried about your ability to perform well on that event, or you're not worried about passing that event, there's still a form of performance stress, which if you don't understand or we don't train our soldiers how to manage mentally that performance stress, it turns into performance anxiety, and that anxiety can physically drain you. I'm not sure if any of you have ever been in situations, so say like I'm an introvert. I'm very extroverted when I teach and when I lead, but by nature, I'm an introvert, right? So I recharge when I'm on my own. No one else is bothering me, talking to me, anything like that. I've had plenty of situations throughout life, especially teaching actually, where I'll be in front of students or I'll be on stage and I'll teach. and individuals want to come and they'll engage socially with me afterward. And those engagements will drain me
Yes.
like I've had an entire physical training session. Like 10 minutes of talking to individuals wear me out more than working out for an hour, because of how that affects my nervous system. And everyone is a little bit different. If you're extroverted, that may be an individual that gets energized. They literally become more energetic when discussing things with other people. So performance anxiety, especially, and this is something I personally, because I hated with the PRTP. One, you didn't warm up. And then two, you do 2 minutes of an event, maybe if people even last for the full 2 minutes for a push-up or a sit-up, and you're waiting 10, 15, 20 minutes throughout this line, turning around, which is also never written down, but everyone just followed it based on tradition, because I was never written down anywhere, right? Just waiting to do another event, and then you're waiting to do another event, and just the waiting in between, anticipating the next event, especially the one that people worried about the most, which was the run. By the time you get to the run, you've been waiting there. And here's the other thing, we could have showed up at 5, right, to do the test. You don't typically start the test till like 6:30. So you've been there for like an hour and a half, getting further dehydrated and further, hunger. Yeah, you feel like you want to eat more. You don't want to drink because you don't want to have to use the restroom in the middle of the run. And all these other things. So you're just waiting, anticipating consistently for 90+ minutes before you get to this event. Now your energy utilization is extremely limited.
And if we dare to take it to the night before, I don't sleep because I'm afraid to get up.
Yes.
Because
The night before, exactly.
And even so, like, we're sure that we're gonna pass it, we're still a little nervous. We're
Yes.
still like, oh my gosh, I just wanna get it done.
Exactly what you're saying. I have a problem. When you say the word test to me, in my mind, my brain goes crazy. And
Yeah.
I actually have, an SLC, for instance, to a class, and literally they like, well, as soon as we're done, when y'all get back, you're taking a test. Now, I have done completely, because I don't have to think about it, but they like, yo, we got a test tomorrow morning. I don't go to sleep. I'm like, yo, I'm gonna fail this. Like,
Yeah.
start packing my bags.
So these are important conversations, because this all comes back to resiliency, which, as a leader, we need to understand how our soldiers are taking in this information. And when we just dish out information without thinking about how it's going to be interpreted and perceived,
Right.
we can completely change the efficacy of the individuals being able to do what they're doing. And, that obviously affects us, because there's a reason we want that mission done in the first place. So it's really negligent of us as leaders to not consider how we're speaking to our soldiers on these pieces, right? But resiliency and the sports psychology will be a whole nother class. But just note that physically you can typically perform an assessment better in the morning than the afternoon, because of that anxiety thing for a long period of time. You perform an activity better typically, a normal activity better in the afternoon.
Taking the test to pass the test, or taking the
Yes.
test to pass the class, or it's stressful.
Yes, it is.
And I've never really been to war, but I've been in a deployed environment and it's stressful. You don't hydrate properly. You barely ever sleep because you work 12, 18 hours. So it's like, that is the conditions that you're gonna be in, and you probably have to work sometime or another, depending on the threat.
So, let me know if I'm hitting the point. Are you saying that the body needs to be able to be used to performing with less sleep and under stress?
I think we need to train how we fight, and if that's how we fight, then that's how we need to train.
This
We
is-
need to make sure our bodies are capable to perform in that environment where we are stressed, where we are dehydrated, where we are tired, because you know what? We just worked freaking 12, 16 hours. We just come back and we would work 16 hours.
That is a very, very,
So
very
why
important
are we
point.
doing the ACMT? Are we doing it to just check the box and say we're fit to fight?
Yeah,
And
so
not
the-
be fit to fight?
So the why on that is very important. So with our leaders, and I've encountered this many places, especially they would have those concepts. But here's the thing, there's a difference between, as you're mentioning, an assessment and a training session. If you try and fatigue your soldiers first, then put them through a training session because the intent is for them to learn how to train while fatigued, that is actually very detrimental, because you're increasing the risk of injury during that training session, and the body's going to get much less out of it. The point of the training session is to improve their capabilities. Now, if you want to improve their resiliency and their grit and their perseverance, that is an entirely different thing. We need to train their mindset. And there's other safer ways to train their mindset than in that session. But there's a huge, huge benefit as a leader to be able to assess how well your soldiers perform under pressure. And again, that would be an assessment. So if you're able to see how, if you want to see how well your soldiers perform in a task that wouldn't risk necessarily their life and limb with sleep deprivation or with being dehydrated, that is critical and very important for their knowledge and your knowledge. It could be a very good wake-up call for them because that is true to our operational environment. But assessments don't need to be done as that often, is the big piece there. Go ahead,
And
Charmaine.
is that like, I believe I'm gonna use my own words, goal setting? Like meaning instead of you just doing it in 10 minutes to get this done, you set a time, yo,
Yes.
7 minutes to get this, that shit, you know, I need this move 7 minutes.
Absolutely. So when you're developing for like your units, if leaders would start developing their physical readiness training for their units based on their occupational task, say it's setting up a trash can, right? You know that, you know, it could take an X amount of long time if people are just talking, walking around, picking up stuff. But if you set up a specific goal, right, a SMART goal, and you made it so that how quick could a team of 6 soldiers, team of 8 soldiers set this up? If I blew a whistle and it was a competition and they were moving as quick as they could the whole time, and you made that the goal of you know, getting to that point, your training sessions help them get to that point. Their capabilities now, once they're able to accomplish that goal of setting up a tent, not only increasing the skill and the proficiency of it for everyone, but your physical capabilities. If you're able to set it up in this time, which isn't even needed in the operational environment, then you're going to actually be saving a lot of energy when you do it at normal speed later on. We do that for everything, right? Setting up any of the showers that we have to be able to operate, managing some of our vehicles that we're being able to manage, right? So this is where we need to change the culture and the mindset of why we're doing what we're doing with our physical training. Just as Matt brought up, same thing with the assessment. Are we as leaders, when we're sitting down and programming these ACFTs for our soldiers, doing it because our soldiers haven't taken one in a year and we need to stop reflecting red and DTMS? Are we taking an assessment so that we are seeing where our soldiers are so that we can communicate with them on how they can improve their physical capabilities?
All about the metrics.
We need to make it
Yes.
part of the. You
Yes.
just have to come in here and say that I'm gonna put this in right behind the computer, and that's all I'm gonna do. We need to incorporate physical fitness, which will help with resiliency. believe
Yes, it
or not,
will.
And it helps with stress and it helps with everything. We just don't incorporate it. These
Absolutely.
want us to come in here, oh, and you wanna train? Your core hours are 0:30 to 16:30. Figure it out. Train before or after? I just heard that last week.
It's true. I did hear it. Now, for the sake of, I think all these information is important and it does tie in obviously into the topic, but we have gone down a few rabbit holes. So let's go ahead and continue on these fascia pathways. So for these warm-ups, and again, I said it'll look like a lot of anatomy-based things on here, but this is for you to be able to come back and look at later, if your soldiers look at later, but to initially take in some concepts. So you have about 7 fascial pathways, 7 primary fascial pathways. Your central nervous system, so your brain and your spinal cord, don't recognize these individual muscles that you see on screen, right? Like your rectus abdominis or your quadricep group or things like that. We say something like biceps and triceps as a language. Anatomy is a language that we use to communicate with each other on where a certain muscle or muscle group are. But to our brain and our body, we have one muscular system. We have one skeletal system. Our body doesn't really differentiate the difference, but we do have certain nerve pathways from our spinal cord which can optimize certain movements. So what you see here, this is your superficial, which means closer to your skin, right? Further out from your center of your body, front line. So these are muscles that engage with a lot of sagittal plane movements when it comes to performance. So moving forward and backward. So the way you would read this on the screen would be the top line is the name of the pathway and what plane of motion it affects. The middle part are which of the muscle groups that are primarily going to be engaged. The bottom part are the actual functions that are involved in those engagements. So for your trunk, right, which starts at the top of your shoulder, goes down to about mid-thigh, any type of trunk flexion, so bending your spine forward, or hip flexion, which is a hinge motion what you do through deadlifts and squats. Knee extensions, when you're putting your knees straight. Dorsiflexion, which is when you're going at the bottom of the squat, you're bringing your toes towards your face. Your fast switch, ability to produce force immediately, your fast switch muscle fibers, and balance. A lot of those actions come from this pathway. So when you warm up, if you're going to be involving any of these areas, any of these motions, you want to make sure that you're engaging each of these areas as part of either your dynamic or your specific warm-up. And I'm going to go through each 7 without spending time going over each muscle group because it's, again, it's a part of awareness for you to be able to pull back later. And I've already posted this PowerPoint on the bottom of the Teams aspect so everyone will have access to it, rather than you trying to memorize all of these things at this point in time, right? To show you an example with this picture, you have a pitcher. And often when people think about throwing something, the first thought is their arm, maybe within their trunk of how they're rotating. And this becomes even more apparent if you throw with your dominant hand and then try and throw with your non-dominant hand and realize you have no idea how complex throwing is, right? Because you've patterned it so well with a specific hand. But that throw, everything whenever we're connected to the floor always starts from the floor. So in this case, if you had someone that had some type of injury or some type of deficiency, even if they felt no pain, no discomfort, they had some deficiency in their tibialis anterior, right? Your shin muscle. They have some deficiency within their quadricep, hip flexor group. Anything in that fascial pathway that had a deficiency could prevent their ability to properly innervate one of those other muscle groups, including throwing a ball all the way through putting force and velocity into an object that's going to be leaving your hand, right? So the whole weakest link, right, the weakest chain link absolutely affects us in our body and our system. This is your superficial backline. So this is your posterior chain for your for performance. Notice it starts all the way at the top of your occipital lobe, right? It actually comes up around your skull, and the skin of that can affect. This is where sleep posture can affect a lot of performance as well. And then again, you kind of see what areas are involved with it. Your ability to actually have proper posture against gravity and to maintain away from like kyphoticism, which is that rounded back, and many other forms of posture that we see from people that sit on desks all day or constantly on their phones. This part primarily helps prevent that. This is also the chain you definitely want to warm up when you're going to be running, because running is all about holding a specific posture for a long period of time and about using those slow twitch muscles for your endurance chain for the constant maintenance of those slow contractions, getting your leg off the ground to land in the exact same position consistently. So this is one of those chains you want to absolutely focus on warming up for running activities, as well as, again, deadlift, squats, things of that nature. So those are our sagittal plane. Then we have our frontal plane, right? So which, again, is our lateral movement. These allow you to move forward and backward without failure or without any type of weakness. So if I have a weakness in my IT band, which is the second bullet you see on the neuromuscular pathway, your iliotibial band, that's a fascial tissue that is not a muscle, but your muscle part of that is your TFL, which sits right here on your ACES for your hips, your anterior superior iliac spine. The muscle is called your tensor fasciae latae. That muscle is what keeps our knee from going out when we're walking and running forward. So if you never innervate that muscle and teach your body how to use that properly and work that properly, even going up and down stairs or running forward on a track, you could be at a greater risk of injury and reduce your performance because your body's kind of trying to constantly keep you in the sagittal plane because that muscle is too weak, right? So our frontal plane muscles, which are often neglected, usually prevent us from performing well sagittally. The other aspect is your intercostals, right? So your intercostals are the muscles that sit in between your costal bones, just your rib bones. When individuals don't diaphragmatically breathe right, or they don't train those muscles, this is where a lot of stitches in running comes from. That sharp pain in your side and your lung, because your costals actually rotate, your rib bones rotate when you breathe. So if you don't train your intercostals through how to manage rotation through pressure and through different positions, then you're at a greater risk of different types of injury that can last and be very annoying for several days, if not longer. Okay? This is your transverse plane. So this is everything that helps you rotate, but keeps you, again, like the frontal plane, going sagittally. So often when you see people train their obliques, you see people do rotation-based exercises, Russian twists and all these other things. But in real life and through functional movement, the primary action of your obliques is to prevent rotation. When you're boxing, you're trying to kayak, you're trying to run, you're trying to do anything, you don't want your body rotating and taking extra energy. Your obliques help counter rotation from each side. So the best thing you can do for obliques, if you want to train them functionally, is to put your body in an unstable position where your body's trying to rotate, but you're keeping it from rotating. So an example of this is like a 180 landmine. So if I had a barbell on a pivot point, and I'm pulling it to the side, right? I'm creating this type of arc. What the weight would want me to do is to rotate with that weight to the side. So me keeping trunk stability and just moving that external resistance and managing the stability within my system helps with that. Another really good one for that is called a, was that?
So I've been trying to get rid of love hands. I've been doing it
Oh,
all the time.
There you go. The other one is a Paloff press, which is Palof press, which usually uses a cable or resistance band.
Yeah.
Basically it's tied to an anchor point, and you stand away from that anchor point with tension so that if you relaxed your body would turn toward the anchor point. But instead, what you do is you stand away from the anchor point and you press forward, because the further that tension gets from you and you increase your lever, the harder it is for you to stabilize. So as you're stabilizing, you teach your obliques to do that. You can do that in a staggered standing position, straddle standing, on one foot, kneeling, etc., in order to change how you're managing that posture. But this is doing those and doing isometric versions of those help us produce more power in everything else we're going to do, because our body doesn't have to waste energy in these other muscles for our stabilizers. Yes, ma'am.
Would an alternative to that be when you do the plank and you sway from side to side as you are in the plank, you sway your hips? That's
So-
right. Would that be
So
similar motion? Or
somewhat. So the plank is a really good example. A plank helps train your helps train you to keep your body in a stable sagittal position. If you're thinking about normal high or low plank, right? A high plank being the front leaning rest position, a low plank being on your elbows. The entire intent of a proper position there is how do you contract all of the muscles of your trunk and prevent your hips from going through extension, which is sagging, or through flexion, right, which is picking your hips up. How do you maintain that stability against the fatigue that your body wants to do? You do the same thing for the frontal plane in a side plank. A proper side plank, your body should be bladed, meaning that you have a straight line from your shoulder, your ear to your shoulder to your hip to your knee. So the first thing that people want to do in a side plank when they get tired is rotate in or to sag their hip down. So preventing that and being able to prevent that longer trains those structures and trains you neuromuscularly how to maintain a certain posture against that fatigue. For transverse, it's kind of harder because in transverse, you have to put yourself in a position where your body wants to rotate, but you're fighting rotation. Actual rotation doesn't work it the way people think it works. Then you have your deep frontal line. So your superficial is closer to the skin. Your deep ones are what actually allow you to stabilize against a lot of extra weight. So if you wanted to, again, bench, squat, deadlift, clean, snatch, jerk, etc., pick up your child, move a tire to be able to replace an Humvee, anything that you're going to have to be able to put a lot of force through, you have to be able to brace for. And these are the muscles that help you brace. It actually goes all the way up to your jaw. So where from your jaw to your sternocleidomastoid, this is actually why in a lot of strength sports, they actually have a bite guard, because your ability to actually have a good grip with your teeth and a good clenched grip affects that entire chain. In fact, we've seen through studies in neuroscience where if your jaw is too far forward, too open, or too far back, you're not able to produce amount of global force throughout your body. So it's one of those interesting things. This is the transverse plane on the deep side of it. And that'll be our last one of the fascial pieces. But again, it's not for you to memorize what each of these muscles are. The point is to understand if you never even looked at the body like this, then you were more than likely not training the body in order to prevent your injury or increase your performance. And anything that you're not already doing that correlates to something you're doing means that you have weakness. And focusing on your weaknesses are the greatest way to increase your strengths, because you'll adapt to them quicker. All right. Now, pulling back to each one of these warm-ups, now that we've kind of talked about that, if you're going to design your general warm-up should last approximately just 3 to 5 minutes. If you're going to, especially if you're doing all 3 warm-ups at once, which isn't needed, right? Most of the time, you only need maybe 1 or 2 of the 3 types of warm-ups in a particular session. But if you're going to add all 3, general warm-up about 3 to 5 minutes. With general was just to focus on what?
Heart rate.
Just your heart rate, right? So ideally you want an RPE, your rate of perceived exertion, about a 4 or 5, which means that you could maintain that activity for about 45 to 60 minutes, if not longer. Even though you're not going to be, you should be able to maintain. If you're doing a general warm up and you're getting to a point where you can only maintain that intensity for 5 or 7 minutes, that's not the warm up pace. You're doing too much, right? You back off. Exactly. The most ideal situations for this, and you can use anything. You can even use calisthenics, as we talked about before. But endurance training machines, a jump or skip rope, battle ropes, heavy bags, things where you're not going to necessarily fatigue your musculoskeletal system. You're just focusing on your cardiovascular system. That is the key to doing a general warm-up. Are there any questions on that particular topic? We have dynamics. Dynamic warm-ups can last between 5 and 25 minutes. Again, it really depends on your training session and what you're doing. Things like preparation drill, hip stability drill, shoulder stability drill, full for the core. A lot of these are dynamic warm-ups, or working on stabilizing or mobilizing joints. Because of that, your RP can absolutely be higher. You can even get your RP to about an 8 in a dynamic warm-up. You want to choose movements that are based on your perceived weaknesses and whatever you're training. So if you notice in running that you consistently have certain issues with your knee, right? Certain pain, either inferior, so below your knee, superior machines above your knee, maybe lateral or medial, so outside or inside respectively. If you're feeling you have tension in your back or your hips, any type of area you feel that you have a normal deficiency, those are the areas you want to make sure that you're either stabilizing or mobilizing prior to your activity in order to get more out of your actual performance, as well as not feel the suck as much as that pain and discomfort may make you feel. So this is where you really want to pay attention to your training sessions and have your soldiers pay attention to them to plan it. So I gave an example here. So if you have a soldier that's experiencing like instability in their left shoulder when they're coming down on a bench press, they feel like their shoulder's in a different position each time. A good example of something they could do for a dynamic warm-up would be work on internal shoulder rotation. This could be done on your side with like a 2.5 pound plate, 5 pound plate, even with a soda can. Doesn't really matter. This could be done with cables, bands, something that focuses on the internal rotation of that shoulder, which is usually that lack of stability had happened. You want them to do about 4 sets of 25, where they feel they could have done 3 or 4 more at the end of that set. That's what reps in reserve stand for. And it should feel like a 7. Right, which is where the 3 to 4 reps in reserve. It shouldn't feel like they're going to failure. Then after that, they can do an inverted row, which is where you're think of doing a pull-up, but you're holding onto a barbell or some type of horizontal surface, but your heels are still on the ground. Because what this is doing is it's practicing the exact same horizontal pull as the bench press. You're still pulling down to your sternum, just like you would be pulling the bar down to you with gravity, but you have much less resistance on the joint at that point. And that's what you're doing in that eccentric motion, is you're stabilizing through pulling to your chest. So then they can innervate the specific motion of that by working their antagonist. Is that what you're getting us from that? Perfect. So this is something that Sergeant Watts brought up. Another part of a dynamic warm-up that's better for intermediate to advanced lifters is focusing on what's called GPP, your general physical preparedness. GPP is a method of taking your dynamic warm-up and your general warm-up and kind of combining them. It's also seen in forms of exercise science as doing an accessories first training session. And I ran Sergeant Watts through this when we did the overhead press, and he seemed to have liked it since he says he's doing these type of warm-ups in his normal sessions. And we're going to do a physical session next week as well. So if you want to be introduced to some of those type of things. An example of a GPP warm-up is the winning warm-up, right? Winning comes from Matt Winning. He was formerly from Westside Barbell, but he has his own gym called Ludus Magnus in Columbus, Ohio. He's a very well-known strength coach that works with military, firefighters, and then professional NFL players. He's known for not only having a phenomenal strength career, but going through his entire career with having pretty much no injuries, no significant injuries. But the way it breaks down is this. You do 4 sets of 3 exercises, and in which you do the first exercise, the second exercise, and the third exercise is 1 set. And then you'd start at the beginning and you do it all. You'd go through all of these doing 25 reps each. So at the end, you do 300 reps of these movements, 100 each of these exercises.
And this is just a warm-up.
There's just the warm-up. The first exercise should be whatever weakness you have in your main lift. The second exercise should be something that antagonizes that weakness. And the third exercise should potentiate the main lift. Right? So to give you an example, I wrote out 4 here for the 4 primary strength-based lifts. So you see deadlift, overhead press, squat, and bench press. So As an example, on deadlift, if you've noticed that most people start failing, or if you're failing your deadlift, if you can get it off the ground, but you're failing getting it from your mid shin to that lockout position, it's typically a hip extension part of that hinge that you're failing in. That's the weakness of your pattern. So focusing on good mornings, which is that bar on your back, and you're just going through the hip hinge pattern, or on a glute ham raise device, a GHD, for just back extensions, right? That would be something that would focus on the weakness of that movement. And you could add and change the weight depending on your capabilities to make that 25 reps challenging. Then you would go through deep hip flexion to antagonize the hip extension. This could be hanging from a bar and go toes to bar, right? Because a lot of people think that works their abs, but it's actually your hip flexors. Right? It's just that your hip flexors come up underneath your rectus abdominis. This is why you feel the peripheral burn in your quote unquote lower abs, but you don't technically have lower abs, right? Your abdominals don't connect to your legs. They can't move your legs. But since your hip flexors come up underneath that, that's what you typically feel, right? So deep hip flexion, same thing with the decline sit-up. And then you potentiate the pattern by focusing on the exact thing you do in a deadlift. So a sumo deadlift would allow you to do a safer form of that deadlift at lighter weight for 25 before you get to your actual Romanian deadlift, which is similar to a stiff leg deadlift, just with your knees having a little bit more flexion in them, etc. And you see all the examples here on screen, but it follows that winning warm-up style of weakness in the pattern, an antagonist of the pattern, and then a priming movement. And this makes your warm-up specific to you and specific to that training session. So by the time you even get to your main activity, you've already trained your body in everything it needs to do for your activity. Very often when individuals perform this, if they're limited in time, they do this, they do their main lift, and their session's done, which is why it's considered an accessories first warm-up.
Hey, so all right.
Go ahead.
I think everybody need to do the overhead press assessment.
Yeah, you think if they all need to go through the same thing you did?
If I had to do it, everybody need to do it.
We'll be going through. I think they'll change some hearts and minds when they actually feel what a warm-up can feel like. I will say on this, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Sergeant Watts, but most people that have never done something like this, they think that's the workout. Yeah, they're just done.
Guy, he used to have videos.
Oh, yeah, you're talking about this, P90 guy?
Yeah, like he would take you through a warm up and you're like, I'm already like.
I'm already tired. Yes, exactly. And often you should get to a point where you're breathing hard and your heart rate's up in a warm up. And if you're not, you're generally not warming up properly. And you see this a lot with, especially runners. Sometimes individuals are like, well, I'll warm up on the run. And that's, true, you will, but you will perform much better if you warmed up prior to the event. And we see this in the ACFT, we saw this in the APFT a lot. A lot of individuals don't warm up until about halfway, if not 3/4 of the way through the run. So they don't get into their stride, right? They don't really get into that point. But at that point, once you open up into that area and you feel good, now your overall performance
It's
is
the same thing where people get the misconception of actually doing the PR preparation drill because
Correct.
it has push-ups, but they're like, oh, you gotta do push-ups on the. No, that's to warm your muscles up. That don't-
Exactly.
But you don't understand, those 5 that I do there, I'm not gonna be able to do them over
Yeah, which is crazy too, because you never see someone do that in the gym, right? They're like, well, I'm not going to do my first set of bench because I need to be better at my third set of the bench. You don't do it in the gym. That's what your rest
Yeah.
period is for, right? Your ability to rest. The only time you don't rest is an aerobic training session. You had your hand up, Son Rodriguez?
Yes, you were mentioning like people like in the run, like it takes at least 30 minutes to warm up.
Maybe not 30 minutes, but at least like halfway to 3/4 of the way, yeah.
Yeah, but sorry. I agree with that because I myself, I start off very slow, like ridiculously slow. Like if we go out run, like you can leave me in the dust. Because I start off very slow and like usually people's second mile is slower than the first mile. I'm the other way around. It takes me a lot. That's why I was saying earlier, it takes me a lot to warm up. I go faster as
Right.
I go through the run.
And exactly. And those are both styles that can both be effective, but they both typically indicate that the individual hasn't had some type of coach or trainer to do that, which we don't, right? As soldiers, we typically don't have coaches and trainers for that. You want to be able to get to a point where you know what your pace is for a run, especially on an assessment. You should know what your 100% pace is. And that doesn't mean you're all out sprint, just your 100% for 2 miles, what that is. And it should stay the same through the whole 2 miles. Should absolutely stay the same. When individuals try and hit that pace early on and they haven't warmed up and they don't know how to manage, that's when they go too fast and end up slowing down. We have individuals that know that they aren't warmed up and there won't be for a while, they'll start slow and go fast. But you take away 3 seconds per quarter mile, right? That's 20, that could be 21 seconds overall in that 2 mile that you're running. That is a huge score difference. And I've seen soldiers fail their test by 5-6 seconds before. And that could just be them taking that additional step, right? They didn't fall enough, right, to maintain that intensity because they just didn't know. But you have to train to get to the point where every effort in an assessment, every single effort should be maximal. You should know how to apply it and then you rest maximally, just like when you're training. You never hold back from one in order to do another.
Yeah, I definitely apply that format to this.
Yeah, I tried it. I tried it towards the end.
Bad.
You know, and we need to do another running clinic as well. Definitely get more people. All right. So this is the last slide to talk about and fine tune the warm up piece. So bring this all back to circle. We have our last one was specific warm up that we talked about earlier. For a specific warm up, this is better. This is usually done for resistance training. Although, of course, you can do this for running as well, which should be a running drill. You typically want to do 4 to 5 sets of a specific warm-up using a progressive intensity, meaning that you try the pattern with something very light, and then you get a little bit harder, a little bit harder, a little bit harder on the same exact pattern in order to make sure if you remember the size principle in the physiology class, you're showing your body how to innervate different nerve plexus basically throughout the same muscle group in order to have the force production that you want. And I show an example on the bottom. So if your main lift is a bent over row, right, which is a horizontal pull motion, you could start with 4 sets, or if you're going to be doing 4 sets of 6 at 85%, that's your actual training session. And I gave you the numbers here so you can kind of see how this would work for you. If individuals 1 rep max is 225 pounds, their working weight would be 85% of that, which is 190 pounds. Right, so I did the math for you. For specific warm up, you almost always, regardless, even if you're going to deadlift 1,000 pounds, you almost always want to start with just the bar. It doesn't matter how much you lift. You always want to lift lightweight like it's heavy and heavyweight like it's light, right, to be able to brace properly. So in this case, set 1 would be 10 reps of just the bar. Set 2 would be 7 reps at 30%. For this individual, would be 65 pounds, so on and so forth. So by the time they get to the 5th set, they do 2 reps at 80%, which is your 8 rep max, which means they have 6 reps in the tank. So still, it could be a challenging weight for them if they did a lot, but not right now, right? Not during the warm up. And then they would get to their main set, which would be their first set at 190 pounds, right? So on and so forth, right? This is how you would be able to do your specific warm up, which should be done after your general and or dynamic warm up, instead of just getting into the gym and throwing on 45 and getting at it, right? Or just putting on your shoes and running downstairs.
Oh, the steps downstairs, that's my
It's right
warm-up.
All right. So in this clinic, we talked about the purpose of warm-ups. We broke down the 3 primary different categories that warm-ups fall into. And then we started talking about some of the other things that warm-ups affect, right? So the injury reduction aspect of it, how it can increase your performance, which is hopefully why you're training in the first place. And you're not just training to get tired in that day, you want to get better from it and see some type of progress. And warm-ups are essential to make sure that can happen, especially when it comes to improving your weaknesses. The better you're able to do this, you can focus on getting more mobility and getting more stability without adding to your workout session. Make it specific to you so you can stop experiencing that pain and discomfort during your session and start feeling better. Okay. We'll talk about cool downs. I'll do a whole class soon on mobility improvement itself, on what that is. And we'll cover how to do cool downs efficiently as well, which is also usually skipped because you just did your workout session. Now you have to get to work, right? Or go do something else. So people usually just slam that protein shake and leave.
And we do a disservice to our bodies and still push our bodies to.
Yes.
These are incredible machines that just do it. You know, we push ourselves to the extreme. Then we complain that we break. But if we were to like be in tune, like know all this information, you know, and be in tune with our bodies tell us that we need to stretch our neck. Like you feel it, our bodies tell you, like in the morning, you gotta stretch your hips, you gotta stretch. Your body tells you, but because we're so focused on other stuff and rush, we just don't even
Absolutely.
consider our bodies.
And that's kind of what I want to close this out on, is saying this too. I'm gonna close out with a misconception. We've seen for the last about maybe 9+ years in exercise science that static stretching, which means like think of like recovery drill, is where you get into a certain position and you hold that position isometrically for say 20, 30, or 60 seconds. Static stretching prior to physical activity has been shown to increase injury risk and decrease performance.
You just gotta do the motion then?
You just need to go through the motion dynamically, because when you statically stretch, this is me hitting the statement with a huge reduction hammer, right? So I'm not getting into it scientifically, but for understanding, when you statically stretch, you're inhibiting those nerve connections. You're telling your body that the important piece is to dampen your capability to send a nerve signal. And that's exactly what we want post-training. So post-training, since we've just innovated a lot, we want to tell our body, hey, calm down, right? Change the length of the structure. It's okay to be eccentrically contracted. In other words, in a long position. So stretching should be done, but post-training. Prior to can be extremely detrimental to your overall health and performance, which I still see people all the time go out there before run and like lengthen their hamstrings. And that's one of the, it's so bad. And they don't know any better. You just don't know. Absolutely. But we've started changing that with physical readiness training and pushing that out. But a lot of individuals, again, they don't know. So I wanted to take this time, since we're talking about warm-ups, to mention that. So I'm very glad you brought that up. Yes. So that's going to conclude today's session. I'm going to go ahead and bring the recording to a close. But I appreciate all of you being here and taking your time to listen for this class.
So the last quarter of that, well, I